back to my channel. Apologies, the video cut out on me the other day, so I'm going to have to go back to it. So I'll just tidy up from where I left off. And I was talking about one of your comments on the social model, and how the social model doesn't ignore impairments, but that the social model says that the impairments are intrinsic to the person, whereas disability is how the person is excluded from society, and if you provide accommodations then the person will no longer be disabled. And I was saying how the social model doesn't, that understanding I can't make sense of. It seems very simplistic to me, and I personally disagree that impairment and disability are separable in that way. I mean, yes, disability, strictly speaking, can be understood as being excluded from society because of the impairment, but I would say that the disability, in my case, a lot of the disability is a direct effect of is a direct outcome of my intrinsic impairment, and that yes, some of it, admittedly, I can be made less disabled to some extent if I'm given the right support and the right accommodations. Sadly, that's very lacking because we live in this bloody Tory society that doesn't really give any support. But in an ideal world, if I was given all of the support I needed, that would obviously make my life a lot easier. But in my case, I'd still be disabled. I'll always be disabled because no amount of support or accommodations will get rid of my disability, essentially. Disability being the effect the impairment has on my ability to make the choices I might otherwise make and to access society and things like that. Not just to access society, mind. You can be disabled, in your own home when you're not even anywhere near society, just because your impairment can stop you being able to do certain things, or efficiently or whatever. So in my experience, disability, if you like, is the effect of the impairment, essentially. It's like it emerges out of the impairment, whereas the social model would say that disability is socially constructed, because if you provide the accommodations, the person will no longer be disabled. In my experience, my disability is not socially constructed. It will be there no matter what, because it is directly, intrinsically related to my biology. And I think that actually is the case for a lot of people. I just think the social model is very naive, and I don't agree with this strict distinction between impairment and disability. Yes, technically speaking, they mean slightly different things, but the idea that you can resolve disability, and that disability is a social construct, and that the person isn't intrinsically disabled, they're only disabled because society makes them disabled, that I just don't get that idea. It doesn't tally with my own experience at all. My experience is the complete opposite of that. And I suspect that that's the case for other people as well. So that's what I want to say to that. Anyway, so moving on to the next comment now. I don't see myself anywhere in a new age autism either, and that is part of what makes me feel alienated from most autistic spaces. I particularly don't at all connect with this notion that autism makes you want to save the world and care about social justice. Sorry, but my inability to connect with others just doesn't make these things for me. Just doesn't make these a thing for me. And I was diagnosed in part because I have low empathy. For older descriptions of autism are much closer to my own experience. I really do think that there needs to be a non-clinical term for those who have had difficulties recognised by a medical professional but do not meet the criteria for autism. So yeah, that's interesting, and I can relate to that myself. Empathy is a controversial topic. It means different things for different people. Historically, autism was seen as a specific deficit in empathy, but not affecting all empathy, affecting very specific part of empathy, which is the cognitive ability to place yourself in another person's position, to effectively perspective take and to understand the thoughts and feelings of another person and to respond appropriately to that. That was the empathy that it was said that autistic people struggled with, and Simon Baron-Cohen actually called it 0 degrees of empathy. He actually wrote a book about it. If you're interested in reading some of the more old school accounts of autism that do link it with a problem of empathy, check out Simon Baron-Cohen's book, 0 Degrees of Empathy. I don't agree with Simon Baron-Cohen on many things. He's a highly controversial figure, and I don't really agree with his extreme male brain theory. I won't go into that now. I disagree with him on that, just because I think it's an overly simplistic theory. But I'm not going to go into that now because that's a massive debate. But nevertheless, he has said some things that I do kind of relate to. Just because I disagree with him in some areas doesn't mean that everything he says I disagree with, you know. He has done a lot of work into empathy, and yeah, 0 degrees of empathy is the idea that basically, according to Simon Baron-Cohen, both autistic people and psychopaths have what he calls a 0 degrees of empathy. But the 0 degrees is in different areas. Whereas a psychopath has what Simon Baron-Cohen calls 0 degrees negative, which means the psychopath has a problem with empathy and doesn't have any sort of positive features. And also the empathy that psychopaths struggle with is very specific to affective empathy. So a psychopath, for example, doesn't experience the normal range of emotions, and therefore, because they don't experience the normal range of emotions, and they particularly struggle with feelings around sort of anxiety and things like that, and normal kind of responses to another person's suffering, a psychopath can be very, very callous and will often go out of their way to hurt other people. They're very manipulative. They know how to hurt other people, and they are driven to do so. They have this complete disregard for other people. Like, they treat other people like objects, essentially, that they can dispose with at will. They're completely cold. They don't have any feelings. They can fake feelings very effectively. They can put on a show of feelings, but they don't experience natural. They completely lack the natural ability to have any affectivity at all. It's all very fake. But a psychopath, nevertheless, will have good theory of mind. They will have very good theory of mind because they're able to manipulate other people. They know exactly what someone else is thinking and feeling. They know it, and they can use that to harm another person. So that's why Simon Baron-Cohen calls the empathy deficit that psychopaths have 0 degrees negative. In autism, it's the other way round. In autism, he calls the problem with empathy 0 degrees positive. Because in autism, it's the other way around. An autistic person will usually, obviously there are exceptions, but an autistic person will usually have a normal regard for other people. They will care about other people. They won't want to hurt another person's feelings. They will, care about other people the same way as any normal human being would care about another person. Not want to hurt others. Have a kind of a sense of right and wrong. that sort of thing, not wanting to go out of their way to harm other people, not being callous, not being manipulative. An autistic person typically, the struggles of an autistic person will be that really struggle, to actually understand that other people have thoughts and feelings that are separate from their own, which is the problem of theory of mind. So that's why autistic children in particular can appear not to care about others. So, for example, they might annoy other children. I know I used to do that. They might annoy other children. They might, other people might get upset, and an autistic child might find it funny, not because they're wanting to make the other person upset, like a psychopath would, but because they just don't understand that that other person has thoughts and feelings that are separate to their own. So if an autistic child finds something funny and another person doesn't, the autistic child, an adult, it has to be said, I've just used talking about children because obviously in childhood it's more like, maybe a bit more like extreme, maybe. Your autistic child, if someone's like crying, for example, an autistic child might not understand why they're crying if it's something that doesn't make them upset, because they can't put themselves in that other person's position. Because if they've not experienced it themselves, they can't access it. They can't do the whole theory of mind thing of like working out why that person is upset and what's going on for them. But if the autistic child is made to understand and they have that information, then they will care. So it's not that they don't care, it's simply that they can't access the information. It's like there's a block. They can't get into that other person's mind. They're literally in their own self-absorbed bubble. And if they're alright, and if they're not experiencing an emotion, they won't understand why that other person is excuse me. They won't understand why that other person is experiencing that emotion. Whereas a psychopath will know what the other person is thinking or feeling, and will get pleasure out of using that information to their advantage in a really callous, manipulative, intentional way. So that's the difference, really. An autistic person is down to naivety, not knowing, which can make them sometimes behave in a way that's not very appropriate, not because they want to cause harm, and not because they're trying to cause harm, simply because they don't understand. And once they do understand, then they won't do it anymore. Like, I used to do things in the past simply because I couldn't access that understanding of what someone else was thinking or feeling. Now I do know, because I've got a lot more awareness now. I won't do certain things I used to do in the past, like trying to think of an example. I don't know, like I once tore a girl's book because they wouldn't let me play with them, for example, okay? I didn't realise that is an inappropriate thing because I couldn't understand why that was wrong. Now I do know why that's wrong, and I wouldn't do it. So that shows it wasn't that I was trying to be nasty, it's simply that I didn't have the ability to understand. But obviously that is a difficulty with empathy, it's just that it's a different problem to, or a different difficulty to say a psychopath. And Simon Cohen actually argues that psychopathy and autism are actually opposite ends of the spectrum. So it's actually, in theory, kind of impossible to be autistic and be a psychopath, because in order to be a psychopath, you have to be able to manipulate, and that's precisely what autistic people can't do. So they both struggle with empathy, but it's for different reasons, and it's a different type of struggle. And Simon Cohen calls the autistic struggle 0 degrees positive, because he argues that although autistic people struggle with their empathy, specifically the theory of mind, but they do have intact ability to care for others. So the effective empathy, in other words, the ability to kind of feel for other people is there, even if an autistic person might struggle to always understand that or to experience it in an appropriate way. But the fact of the matter is, it is there, that ability to care. So Simon Cohen says that an autistic person will care deeply for other people and often has a very strong sense of justice and a sense of right and wrong, and will want to be a good person in a way that a psychopath wouldn't be. So that's why he calls it 0 degrees positive. An autistic person is socially conscious, if you like, or usually is. Obviously there are exceptions, but it's not part of autism not to be socially conscious, if you see what I mean. An autistic person has all the usual care and concern for others that any normal, typical person would have. It's just that they struggle to get inside someone else's head, basically, which is why they can appear to be very self-absorbed and sometimes do things that might appear inappropriate or as though they don't care, when actually do. It's just that they can't they struggle to kind of do what society expects. Okay, so I hope that clarified that. Now I'm going to move over to video number 2 now to carry on going through some of these comments. So move for video 2.